Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're all doing great, as I always say, staying happy and healthy and hydrated and all that kind of stuff. And in this video, I have a few stories from the United Kingdom that get pretty dark, so that's my content warning, I guess. Things do get dark in some of these stories, but still, pull up a stump with me, and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. So I'd like to tell this story that I just remembered the other day. I still don't know what it was, but it sounds like what people in North America might call a skinwalker or a wendigo creature, based on the stories that I've read. Now I have told this before to other people, but here it is. So, relative to how old I am now, I would consider myself a kid back then, and I'm British. So we go to Cumbria to spend the summer at my uncle's, whilst he and my dad work on his house. So my uncle lives with my grandmother, and they have this huge house in the middle of the woods. It's really hilly as well. As my dad and uncle work on the roof, I decide to go exploring in the gardens. A small clearing of land surrounds the house before it transitions into a thick woodland. I see a patch of no grass in this small area. I head over to see it, thinking that it was a log or something. It's a deer carcass, and it smells like death. Deer are quite common in this area. I remember it like it was yesterday. The flesh had been torn from nearly every bone, but from around the head. I feel a cold sweat, and I just leave the area. I head back to the house, climb up on the roof via some scaffolding, and I tell my uncle about what I saw. I remember him pausing as soon as I said that and looking out toward the clearing that I was talking about. After a momentary pause, he says, don't worry about it. It's probably just a fox. And I think, a fox? Are you kidding me? But I do shrug it off. I go inside, and I call it a day. So, sometime later, about 2 weeks or so go by. Me and my uncle and dad head down to a local DIY store one morning to get some tools and some slate or something. I don't remember everything we bought. This is nothing unusual, and then we head back home and have lunch. My grandmother says that while we were out, she saw a black figure walking around on all fours in our driveway. She said it looked like a big dog, but its hind legs were longer than its front. But it was just a shadow to her, so she couldn't see it very well. And me, at this age, this scares the hell out of me, and I immediately think about the deer corpse. My uncle, who has been deep in the woods plenty of times, tries to say that it was probably a wildcat, or like a black panther or something. And that could have been a reasonable explanation, as in the 1970s, owning large cats was banned in England, so many people just decided to abandon the cats by letting them free into the woods. But no big cat would go so close to our garden, not to mention our driveway, as apparently they're very timid as far as big cats go. So I spend the next week or so nervous that I can't go outside half the time. So fast forward once again to a few weeks later, after my grandmother sighted the weird creature. I had forgotten all about it by this point, and so had everybody else. On the final week, I have to stay at my uncle's before he and my dad have a 4-month break on working at the house. The woods which surround our house are on the side of a steep hillside, which apparently is popular with mountain bikers. Me, my dad, and my uncle decide to go in the woods, 'cause why not, and to see how well it is for mountain biking. I'd completely forgotten about the previous events before this, like I mentioned. We go in through a gate at the bottom of our driveway and head into the woods. The air is musky. It's really hot, like 30 degrees, and it's pretty dark. So, fast forward 30 minutes into this. We're in the thick of the woods after heading in one continuous direction up this hill. There are plenty of paths going off in all different directions that have been left by bikers. We stop to look at our map, and all of a sudden we hear this thudding sound. It's really loud. We all turn to see a good number of deer sprinting like lunatics up the hill. I was too excited about exploring to give a damn about this, but my uncle looks concerned and says that it's a good idea to keep heading up the hill. We get to the top of the hill and we're out of the woods. We stay up there for a while, and my uncle says that we're going to head back down in a few minutes. We head closer to the woods, and we smell the most pungent smell of something rotting that I've ever smelled. There wasn't any sewer works up in here, so that wasn't it. We decide to head back down. My uncle gets into his bag and pulls out this huge kukuri blade. He then decides to tell us what he saw the deer running from. He saw something else. He said that it was standing upright and then had the posture of a dog or a big cat on its hind legs. In my head, I'm freaking out, going apeshit. I'm remembering what my grandmother said and the deer carcass. It comes flooding back to me. I see my dad in the corner of my eye pulling a WTF face and giggling, calling my uncle crazy. Ever since another one of my uncles died, I have 5 of them, 4 years prior to this, my uncle that I'm with now started to act like a bit of a lunatic. It's getting towards dusk, so we start heading into the woods. All the way down, my uncle is getting crazy, squatting down, telling us to be silent and keep our eyes out. The smell follows us all the way down. After 15 minutes, we can see the exit to our garden. We can see our lights are on. This is troubling for us because the lights on the outside of the house are motion sensitive, and since our grandmother doesn't ever go outside by herself, it means that something the size of a human must have triggered them very recently. They've got a cooldown time of around 30 seconds, if I remember correctly. A minute later, we hear this screeching sound from about 100 meters behind us. Everyone basically jumps out of their skin. We turn around to see this lanky, crooked, dark humanoid figure, about 2 meters tall from my memory. We all completely go mad and sprint like MFers to the gate. All the more I can hear this thing running towards us as well. We run through the gate as fast as possible when the garden lights decide to switch off. We're in the pitch black and can't see anything. My dad, who has been holding my hand since we started running, suddenly yanks me nearly off my feet as he suddenly changes direction. He reaches the house, and the lights turn on, and we turn around to see darkness. My uncle, who was halfway down the drive when the lights turn on so we can see around us. He runs up to us and says that he could see it just behind some trees, just about to go through the gate, but the lights dazed him momentarily, so he lost sight of it. After about 30 seconds, the stench begins to dissipate and wane. We head back inside and talk to my grandmother. We ask if she's all right. She says she's fine, but she could hear someone talking and knocking on the doors while we were gone. After a few seconds of silence, I ask, "What the hell was that thing?" My uncle tries to explain the big cat hypothesis, and that it was just a panther stood on its hind legs. I immediately call bullshit on that, but we don't say much further. We spend one more week there, and then me and my dad head off. The house my dad and uncle worked on was only just completed 2 years ago, but this happened around 10 years ago. Ever since that night happened, my uncle just loaded up on weapons and went pretty crazy. He was also diagnosed with severe depression and some mild form of OCD soon after as well. I guess that sight, combined with the death of his brother, really screwed him up mentally. But as soon as he finished the house, he sold it and moved into the local town. Also, As far as I know how it looked, the most detailed description I can give of it personally is akin to that famous Wendigo illustration. However, it had a more human head. There was no antlers or anything like that. So I've been itching to spill my possibly paranoid theories regarding the area in which I used to work, East Yorkshire, specifically the Holderness Coast. The place is very rural, cut off from the rest of the country. Nobody ever passes through, and it's isolated socially due to a number of features, notably the thick accent with traces of Old Norse that's pretty much incomprehensible to outsiders. My work was in the logging trade. 6 days a week, I'd get up at 4 a.m., journey out to the only major urban center, Hull, which coincidentally isn't that bad, to a wood farm. I'd cut up and bag up logs, kindling, and then load up my dirty white van and run out deliveries to all the country folk who still think that coal and coke are the only way to heat a bath. During my 12 years in this trade, I ran into a lot of unsettling things. I overheard strange ramblings and witnessed some very suspicious things. Secondly, and this is well documented, the region has a nasty history regarding missing persons and child abuse. My mother, who was a social worker in the city, often talked of uncooperative police officers, pedophile rings, and institutionalized abuse in care homes. So anyway, I moved a few weeks ago and have only recently started to be comfortable talking about the things I suspect. Whilst it is suspicion, I could never shake the feeling that there was some superstructure type thing that I didn't know about, and regardless of whether 90% of the things I'm about to divulge are wrong, there's still 7 people missing a day statistic, heroin-filled seaside towns, and pedophile rings. Firstly, the old wives' tale my grandfather used to tell me about the church. In the mid-19th century, Hornsey, a nearby seaside town, now filled with heroin, was very popular with factory workers from Hull. The story goes that the congregation used to kidnap kids from the town, bring them a few miles down the coast to Mapleton, and, well, do spooky stuff to them. He never said what, but he left it to my imagination. After a shipwreck near the hamlet and the murders of the survivors got out, when the port authorities came looking for the goods, they found the graves of the kids took from Hornsey beneath the floors of the old medieval church. They tore it down and rebuilt it. I don't know anything about what happened to those involved. He never claimed to know. But I now think that the whole tale isn't too far from the truth. One incident sticks out, or rather a collection of events, that leads me to believe that the child kidnapping is still a pastime for some of those backward people. In the late 1990s, when I had just started in the wood trade in Mapleton, there used to be 3 makeshift shacks on some land behind some terrace houses in the sea. I delivered to one house there, an old woman called Deirdre, though she was known to me locally as the Witch. Deirdre was a heinously ugly woman, the nose, the warts, even on the nose, wrinkles, rotting teeth, the works. I have no idea how old she was, but given the area, she could have been 50 or she could have been 90. Poor people tend to age quickly. The other 2 shacks belonged to her sons, whom I nor anyone else claimed to ever see. Her shack was standard wood, salvaged PVC windows, and some corrugated thing. It was covered in dirt, at least 1 inch of soot. During the year in question, a couple of kids had gone missing in one of the villages around the area. Not a lot of fuss was made. Their parents were junkies, so apparently that meant that the kids' lives didn't matter. During my rounds in the village, I overheard a conversation on my way into the back garden of one of the houses, very softly on the wind, mind you, so I could be mistaken, but it went along the lines of, "The witch never asked us." When I entered the back garden, I greeted my customer, this old fat guy who was toothless, and you can just picture the rest of him, and a farmer who I hadn't seen before then. I asked him the standard question, "Been up to oot or note?" Translation, "What have you been up to, dear sir?" To which the customer replied, laughing, "Looking there what's mine." Translation, "Looking for what's rightfully mine, my good friend." I asked whether the witch had something to do with it. He was startled by this, and the mood became very aggressive. Needless to say, I left it at that. I continued to the witch's shack and knock on her door type thing. There's no answer. I knock loudly. No answer. So I leave it, cursing her for making me lug heavy bags of coal for no reason. The farmer that I worked for, old Happy Mike Gray. Pro tip, he was actually a miserable sod. He was quite the guy in regards to currency, so he was distressed to have not gotten the pennies that he was entitled to from the old witch, and he sent me back the next day. This time, she answers. She blocks the door and tells me that she'll take the bags of coal in. Obviously, she can't carry bags of coal, so I insist. I've been polite and whatnot. Instead of the cheery thanks for my niceness, she just huffs and puffs and lets me in. However, they had handprints on the doorframe leading into the adjoining room, and traces of tiny footprints where the floor hadn't been traversed as regularly. Obviously, I put two and two together. I act as if I didn't notice anything, and promptly make my way back to the post office to gather intel. The post office was the hub of social life in rural villages. I asked whether they'd seen the witch coming and going the past few days. The sub-postmistress winks at me, and no shit says, "Aye, but us'll take care of that." Translation, affirmative, but I'll see that your inquiry is acted upon. She made no effort to appear ignorant of what I was obviously hinting at. I mentioned the tiny handprints in the soot, but she just acted so, well, she didn't seem to care that I would suspect her complicity in this whole thing. I ring the police helpline for the case of missing kids, and I tell them what I saw. They promise to follow up on my report, and they treat me like a bit of a fool. I started dreading going back to her shack the following week, but I didn't have to. A big storm hit the coast during the week. Coastal erosion is a massive thing out there. It loses a meter a year, and during storms, it's not unheard of for 10 meters to slip into the sea. And when I go back to Mapleton, I drive onto the land where the shacks were, and I see nothing. The witch's shack obviously fell into the sea, but her son's shacks, which were farther forward, were gone as well. I can see the shitty concrete flooring from where her son's shacks used to stand. I go to the post office again. There's also nowhere else to go in Mapleton, barring the cliffs, and I ask about her. In sea. Translation, in the sea, my friend. I ask about her sons. She just tells me that they've gone with her. I'm pretty peeved now because she's obviously lying. I mention the concrete floors, and she just laughs me away, saying that I'm a cheeky mare. I feel the atmosphere change to that aggressive one again, and I leave. So at the time, I'm really confused by it all. I carry on my rounds. The final house I delivered to in the village was one of the terraces which overlooked the land that the witch's shacks used to be on. As I'm taking the logs to the front room, I see in the kitchen one of those Mega Block, I think it was Mega Blocks or Lego, pirate ships. This old guy, who swore like a sailor, had no family or friends that I knew of, was not spending his spare time playing with Lego. Obviously, the villagers knew that the kids were nearby, or someone's kids were nearby, and they obviously used the storm as a cover to get back at the witch for what I presumed to be her taking a kid without their permission. It sounds far-fetched, and I'd agree with you, but the people and the general atmosphere of the town, plus the subtle clues I picked up, or maybe just wanted to pick up, leads me to think otherwise. I pushed the whole cursed fortnight into the back of my head. I took comfort in the fact that I'd reported what I saw to the authorities and carried on as usual. I try to make light of it now, but it still really gets to me. Moving city, I'm in Aberdeen now, has improved my way of coping with that, and the other things I've noted. But anyhow, that's one of the more stark obvious nasty shit things that I've been a witness to. I have more to follow, not necessarily as major. So I've made it pretty clear that I think a lot of the rural folk around the area used to kidnap kids and do occult shit to them. I'll now detail some other things that aren't really super creepy, but they're just kind of stood out as odd. In one hamlet, even smaller than Mapleton, called Rise, there was a primary school, not unusual in the country, but it was derelict and other schools, larger schools in the area, existed. I'd usually get there quite late as it was on my route back to the wood farm, about 4 p.m. in the day for me, and I would always arrive to an old school bus, like a converted van thing, waiting outside the school. There's an old guy that was always in the driver's seat, no children in the van, no lights on in the derelict school. He'd just sit there in the van, idling. Sometimes, if I was delayed, I'd see him drive off. Still, no kids in it. It never sat well with me. Why was he there? Every week at the time that I was there. An old lady in another village, I forget its name, apologies, had a nasty tumor on her face. Seriously, she was called Miss McCaskill. She was very small and had mannerisms akin to a crow. Very nasty eyes, and face too, unfortunately, and was very twitchy and sharp in her movements. The thing that bugged me about her was that she had 3 chains bolted to the exterior of her house's brick wall, placed about 4 feet up, attached to leather, possibly neck straps. The wall was stained with grime. I reckon it even had traces of feces and urine on it. She didn't have any kids, no pets. I had no idea what those chains were for. This memory is very hazy, as it's coming from my childhood. I got into the wood business via my grandfather. I used to travel along with him most weekends as a kid. I used to deliver to the village when I was older. It was called Halsham. I remember a young-looking guy opening the van door whilst I waited for my grandfather to drop off some kindling. He leant over the driver's seat and reached out for me. Then, it gets hazy. I vaguely remember my grandfather having it out with the kid verbally, and me having to go with him to a village hall, I think, and sit in some dude's office with the young guy. Like I say, it's a very hazy memory. I don't remember much, but I remember crying a lot. Ruse, a collection of several large mansion-type things, had one guy who had no fingertips. He was nice enough to me, but he had the type of land filled with rusted cars, and had a son with a serious learning difficulty who looked like he may have had some kind of FAS. What was sinister was his son had been caught fondling a little girl on some abandoned land north of Hull. It was in the local rag, and the topic was obviously broached by me, in a very polite way, mind you, on one of my deliveries. The guy with no fingertips was quite adamant that he didn't do anything wrong. When I mentioned he might get away with a lenient sentence because of his FAS, he looked offended and told me that in no uncertain terms that he was a normal, healthy kid. He wasn't. I replied if he didn't have health issues, then he did something quite wrong. Yet he still remained adamant that it was fine. Something about country folk not being pansies and taking what they're entitled to. I left it at that, remembering the Mapleton episode. On top of those relatively minor things, I used to see, quite regularly, lights in the wooded areas during the winter when it got dark early. It was so regular that it never struck me as odd until I saw a couple of men walking out of a wooded area in front of me with shovels across the road. They walked out into a farmer's yard. Again, nothing on its own, but with the culmination of the atmosphere and everything that I saw, it did make me wonder. Another customer, old Ellerby, used to give me homemade preserves on the longest and shortest days of the year. She always promised me her special jam with a wink. Needless to say, that preserve was always thrown away when I got home because I just didn't trust it. And talking about all of this makes me feel like I'm not crazy and that I'm not in an echo chamber. Next up, I'll tell you about the stuff that my mom used to talk about before she passed. She was abused as a kid and adopted when she was 8, so she had seen a lot of stuff. But she was incredibly strong and pursued her career as a social worker in protective services rapidly. It kind of destroyed her health, and she died very young at the age of 52. There's a lane on the outskirts of Hull, technically a village called Cottingham, which is notorious for the murders carried out down it. It's rather aptly Snuff Mill Lane. The most recent murder down there was about 3 years back. Some poor sap got jumped by 2 local lowlifes with baseball bats and was pretty unrecognizable from what I heard. So anyways, I digress. In the 1960s, when my mom was still a teenager, a 6-year-old boy was found rolled up in a carpet. He'd been tortured and starved. Basically, he'd been kept as a plaything and finished off with a knife and then dumped. Not too unusual, sadly, but my mom always maintained that the reason why there was little to no investigation was because of Hull's pedophile ring, which reportedly contained senior police officers, judges, counselors. She maintained till the day that she died that it still existed, and I believe her, not just because that I respected and trusted her word, but because in the past decade or so, more and more senior members of Hull's social and legal elite have been outed and prosecuted as such. Never whilst they were in office or anything, mind you. Google Humberside Police Chief and pedophile, and do the same for the counselors. However, the kid wrapped up in the carpet in the 60s, there was nothing on the net about him. Never been able to find anything. Make of that what you will. Next, I'll talk about the stuff that happened at Langthorpe Hall, which is up there with Mapleton in terms of how it makes me feel, plus extra stuff on what I reckon is going on. So this has to do with my relations with an old friend of mine, who also has recently moved away. His family, whom I won't name, a few of them run a large retail chain, used to own a farm / a big mansion called Langthorpe Hall. Look it up in the Domesday Book. The site has been inhabited for 1,000 years at the minimum, and the surrounding grounds had hundreds of square feet of outhouses, barns, and stables. There were some cottages as well. These, I was told, were built a few hundred years ago for families who had settled down due to regular employment with the family in question. All in all, the grounds were huge, like something you'd find in Midwest America, which is very unusual if you're English. So my friend inherited the place after his mom died, and he didn't live in the mansion as it apparently cost a fortune to run, with bills and everything. But he still rented out the outhouses, cottages, and stables. He stayed there once a month to see to the estate-related business, but outside of that, he never showed any love for the place at all, which aesthetically was very beautiful. We went for barbecues in the summer sometimes. In 2011, I saw him leading a horse to a paddock, which is unusual as he rents the stables to horse owners and doesn't actually have any horses himself. So I saw him leading a horse to a paddock from the servant's bathroom. Anyway, when I go back down to the barbecue, I asked him if he's doing a canter or something for us, just joking around. He laughs sarcastically and talks about something else. He only does this when I push him too far, so I leave it, 'cause I'm not that kind of guy anymore. Obviously, it's his business and he's not in the mood to discuss it, so whatever. But fast forward a few hours, I'm still awake with a few other friends, smoking some Du Bois, when we start to hear the horses kicking up a fuss. We all ready his shotgun and go chill upstairs. His house is often targeted and staked out by burglars, with it being so far away from anything of note, so we think nothing more of it. The next morning, I get up early-ish, like 5 a.m., and I go out to get my cigarettes from my car. This takes me just past the paddock. I see one of the old guys from the cottages shoveling what I can only assume to be horse leftovers into a wheelbarrow. Like, a lot of that stuff is piled into the barrow. He stops when I start walking on the gravel driveway, looks my way, shouts, "Now then." I said something, I don't remember what. I got my cigarettes and went back inside. Straight away, I went to my friend's room, the kid who owns the estate. I tell him his horse is dead and the old dude is clearing it up. He denies that there was ever a horse. I get happy because I know he's lying, and I know I can get something out of him. Selling horse meat is pork or something, eh? He gets out of bed, and this is the only time that he's ever raised a fist against me in anger. We're super close, brothers for all intents and purposes, and he says that I'll never understand country life. I laugh, obviously, though I was a bit unnerved. I push him for more information, literally all morning. I only stop when the other guests start waking up. Before I leave to go home, he takes me aside and says something along the lines of, "You know what the people are like round here. They have these traditions, and I'm obliged to follow them now that I own this place. Please, don't ask any more questions, because I don't have the answers." That still makes me nope to this day. I respect my friend for saying that to me though, and seems how as he's sold the place and have moved as I have, I don't want to know what he does or doesn't know. My best guess is some kind of pagan cult thing. I know there's a lot of those P-word rings around for sure around the countryside, so this wouldn't shock me, but I don't know what they did that was so nasty and screwed up to that horse. There's big cat sightings, or well-documented occurrences around here, but even so, if a big cat kills a horse, you don't move it with a shovel and a wheelbarrow. I've heard a few tales of big nasty things screwing up cattle and stuff before, but I pay not so much attention to those. There's plenty more dodgy stuff like that, by the way. A couple more stories about Langthorpe Hall I have second-hand from Charles, the aforementioned friend. Honestly, I'd like to share them. I don't talk to people about this, but over the internet, with people who aren't going to scoff at me, I feel pretty relieved. So, to tell you where I am now, I work as a supervisor at a Gap. Woo, you know. So, this is related to Langthorpe Hall. As I previously said, the place dates back 1,000+ years. The building has been rebuilt numerous times, obviously, But the basement, which is about half the size of the house, hasn't been touched much in terms of decor. Back when we were teenagers and Charlie's mom was still alive, we used to go around when she was on holiday. Strictly no visitors were allowed whilst his mom was home. And what fascinated us the most was the basement, because it had a tunnel running over to the next village, apparently built during the Hull Blitz. I wasn't too convinced by this. The property itself is about 13 to 15 miles away from town, and the tunnel would serve no purpose anyways. The village it leads to is further a few miles away, so we're talking 3 to 5 miles of tunnel leading to a village for no other reason than to run away if in the unlikely event that the Luftwaffe dumped their bombs hilariously off target. But anyway, this time was during our urban explorer phase. We packed a bag, flashlights, and me, Charles, and Ed, another good friend, went down to the basement to explore the tunnel. The basement floor was all dirt and clay, but there were some wooden flooring boards in places. But it was mostly rotten and damp. It was really creepy down there too, but what dark basement isn't? You could tell where the basement had been extended. Normal reddish brick started where older, I presume, larger gray bricks rested. There were some marked engravings on the wall. Nothing paranormal, just stuff like a name and a date. The oldest one that we could find was 1800 or something. It was pretty cool. So we start making our way down the tunnel, single file, as the things are about 5'5" high and 2 feet across. It's very cramped for us, but fun at first. We were walking for close to 10 minutes when Charles, who's at the front, finds another small herbivore tooth, or a human tooth. How he spotted it, I don't know, but we're all creaming our pants with scared-induced bravado. A little farther up the tunnel, and 2 tunnels split off from either side. We didn't expect this. We decided to head straight, as previously, and return to look down those places later. By now, the floor is particularly muddy and chewed up, which set our spidey senses tingling. But here's the thing. The tunnel was going deeper. We could tell by the water level. It was becoming more and more flooded and wet. By now, we were perhaps ankle deep in water. Wells are a must in country life. This is when we definitely knew for sure that this tunnel wasn't World War II related. When the water got to about knee high and we started getting wet, we hit a brick wall. Someone had bricked up the tunnel. We try shifting it with our legs, and the bottom part gives way, leaving a pretty small gap to crawl through. None of us wanting to get wet, we decided not to go through, but I had a peek through with my flashlight. It led to a bigger chamber. I couldn't see much of anything. The light just kept going until it landed on nothing. We all reckoned it was catacombs. Suitably freaked out and happy with our discovery, we turned back. When we get to the 2 tunnels on either side of us, we elect to go into the one on our left. What followed was at least 3 hours of tunnel crawling. My phone died pretty soon after, as did Ed's and Charles's, so we could have been longer. By that point, we all had heinous back pain from crouching, and our feet were numb from the wetness of before. The tunnel we followed never split off, but it did change directions a fair bit, which was odd. On our way out, I shat myself hard. After we got back into the original tunnel, I was at the near. I was the first to realize there was something, or something disturbing the water behind us. It could have been rats, or it could have been something else. Either way, at that point we were very disturbed, and we ran as fast as we could given the space. We were going to go back, but Ed wussed out, which secretly relieved me, because I didn't want to go back either. We didn't see Charles for a few weeks after that. Ed said his mom picked him up from school and dropped him off, dinner as well. I went to a pretty crappy inner city school, and they went to a private one. He'd been grounded from going into the tunnel. His mom knew, and why it was a big deal, we didn't know. But of course, knowing what I know now of all these weird, disconcerting incidents, I can't help but think that she was also involved in it. Harsh, I know, but some people are up to some weird shit, and in the country, particularly one so socially isolated as rural East Yorkshire, it's easy to do just about whatever you want. Something like 7 people go missing a day around here, according to some local rag. Make of that what you will. So as I mentioned, Charlie had inherited the estate at a fairly young age and had to see to its business. I rang him yesterday to ask more about it since he sold it, and he was surprisingly forthcoming regarding some details. His mom and dad used to attend church in New Ellerby on a Wednesday, late night. He said that he reckons that they were part of some extreme cult thing. Regarding the tunnels, he said he knew as little as me, but did say that one of the conditions of his running the estate was to allow the people that stayed in the cottages access to the basement. He said that he never ever saw them use it, but then again, he wasn't there regularly. He still won't tell me about the horse incident and got upset when I mentioned it. I don't blame him. We haven't been close in reality for a long time. It's more of a residual platonic love from the past, so I don't think I'll ever find out the truth about that incident. To be honest, it was pretty exhausting talking to him about these things. I couldn't get the idea of those missing kids out of my head the whole time. This incident occurred when I was 18. Charlie's mom was on holiday, but he wasn't allowed keys to his home at this point. We had a party which was busted by the people from the cottages who just let themselves in at 2 a.m. or something ridiculous like that. We just chilled and smoked in the fields. We often found chewed up rabbits and wood pigeons, not unusual, but on this night we were extra stealthy, knowing what the people in the cottages were like with regards to protecting the estate. We went exploring the outhouses and found a lot of creepy stuff, kids' clothing, crowns, and old moldy magazines, and even some bloodstains, though the bloodstains are definitely more likely from animals when the estate was still actively a farm. After this, we traveled northish, and we went towards a wooded area through crop fields. It was spring, so the grass wasn't tall enough yet to be like the movie Signs. Coincidentally, Charlie was never allowed in the fields when the wheat was at its highest. I'm with Charles, Ed, and Tomo, another good friend, but he turned into a major druggie and he's dead now. He OD'd in Grimsby a year back. Roughly 100 meters from the woods, we hear a fox cry. Not unusual, but it was followed by barking and shouting. Fox hunting has been illegal for a few years now, so we're all engaged in super vigilante mode and start jogging toward the sound to see some country bumpkins getting their rocks off from hunting a fox with a pack of hounds and all his buddies. Charles is an avid supporter of fox hunting, but he's still a country boy though. It's very dark, so we can't see anything distinguishable in the distance, just shadows. We start crouching though, through the slightly tall crop field, until we're about 60 meters away from a group of people. They number about 10-ish. There's a break in the clouds, and the moonlight illuminated the scene better. There's a few on horses, but the pack have stopped. We're all watching with bated breath, even Charles. Some guy dismounts and takes out what was either a large rag or an item of clothing. I think, rather paranoidly, that it was a kid's shirt or something, and gives it to the hounds. They start going wild and run off into the woods. Now, this bit is up for dispute. I could easily be wrong, and Charles denied it at the time, but me and Ed were in agreement. Tomo just wouldn't talk about it. That a distinctly human kind of yelp was let out. We saw movement at the far side of the woods, at which point, unseen by us, somebody fires a rifle, and the movement ceases. We can't see the hounds through the grass and scrub in the woods, but we can hear them barking. The blokes gallop up toward the woods, and we hear clapping and such. Me and Ed pull out our phones, convinced that we've seen a murder. I still am. Charles assures us that it's a fox hunt. Tomo, though, through all of this, rolls a joint and just stands up and starts walking back toward the house. Me and Ed meekishly follow, and we don't talk about it again. When we left, Charles and Tomo went separately. Me and Ed went together. Early morning, we passed by a car towing a horse box. Both of us are still suitably angry at Charles and for his denial, and equally as worried. He does a 3-point turn and follows the car with the horse box. We're both still a little on edge, but we've gone with that weird intent that comes when you think you're in the right. We follow for an hour before we realize that the car in front is doing the same circular circuit over and over again. This realization convinces us both to go home and forget it. I never did, obviously, given the Mapleton escapade that had happened a few months previous to this. So, let me know what you thought of those stories. And as I said, some of them are pretty dark. So, if you have a story of your own, I have an email in the description that you can send it to. I also have a PayPal and a Patreon, if that's something that you're interested in as well. And with that, I think I will leave it there. I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and thank you for watching.